All right, let's just jump right into this one. It's a man's world. We've heard that, we've discussed that, we've probably said it in our own work settings or in our own personal lives. And so I wanted to highlight this book, 15 Lies Women Are Told at Work. It is by Bonnie Hammer, and it was a great listen. I actually listened to it. You all know, if you've been around for a minute, that I prefer to listen to my nonfiction books. And then when I find great ones, then I pick them up and revisit the chapters that mean a lot. And really, this one was one that stood out to me. It's a man's world. And she goes on right after you start the chapter and talks about only if you let it be. And I thought that was a really interesting kind of perspective of this It's a Man's World. Especially in this day and age, especially in America, we know that underrepresented folks are under attack. I mean, let's just call it what it is. And women are part of that. Certainly not in the ways that other underrepresented folks are, but women are certainly part of that DEI attacks and rights being stripped. And so it's easy to fall kind of victim, woe is me, to this it's a man's world sentiment. And don't get me wrong, been there, still there, probably in a lot of ways. But I really liked her reframe of it. And she really talks about how women are differently aligned to be in a man's world. And so, she doesn't dismiss any of the unfairness that has impacted women for eternity, right? For as long as we are aware of that, women are certainly at work and in personal lives being treated unfairly. And we believe sometimes it's easy to fall into that belief that we are second rate, that we fall behind the men in our worlds, in our lives. And we want to make sure that we're not falling victim to that, because when we do, then we, fall into this trap of not fitting in, right? Or not being seen or losing ourselves as part of that being a second rate to a man. And so, I think that that was a really interesting take. And as I think about my own personal experiences, I thought, how many times have I been a different person, presented differently when I am with a group of men, or I'm trying to, quote unquote, prove my worth, right, in the male dominated settings. And so I really appreciated her reframe on that. And I really appreciated when she started talking about all the ways in which women are incredible, amazing humans, leaders, good for our work environments. So we're going to tackle those a little bit now. And then, of course, as always, I have some tips for you as we round out this episode. But let's start with how amazing we are as humans, as women. We are better collaborators and communicators. She talks about in her chapter, in this chapter of her book, about how women, use the collaborative communication piece because we are invested in relationships. We're invested in the humans, in trying to get to know and understand folks differently than men. Men just want to get there, get it done, and get through the task. And again, gross generalization. So for my male listeners, hey, thanks for hanging in there. But really, women are stronger communicators. They tend to be more thoughtful. They tend to want to include folks and involve folks in the collaborative decisions. That doesn't mean that they necessarily slow down the process because of those things. They just tend to be stronger in those areas. And then she also went on and talked a little bit about self-control, which I thought was really interesting. She says that women exhibit more self-control, especially in kind of these fights, if you will. If we're going into conversations where there's something to win, and I say that loosely because, that's that should not be the intent of a conversation. But when there's something to prove, something to win, something to be right about, women tend to exhibit more self-control. They are less emotional, which is a very interesting because women tend to be told that they are more emotional and they're highly emotional. And so, in fact, I just saw a friend and was texting with her the other day about the disparities between men and women and behaviors and showing up. And so, this exhibiting more self-control was really interesting. They want to try and get to a resolution, right? Women want to find a resolution rather than win, rather than be right. And so I think that as I think about my own experiences, a lot of times I am sort of in that collaborative mode. I want to show how we can include everyone, right? It may not be everybody's first decision. It may not be everybody's top choice, but how do we include voices? How do we make sure that folks are being heard, feeling seen, those sorts of things? And so that self control is really important to be able to be a strong leader and be a strong presence in the workplace. The next one that I want to talk about was really interesting as I think about it, and I chuckled a little bit, and then I thought, I don't know if this is true or not, but I've seen research that says multitasking is not necessarily a good skill or a good trait. Yet, Bonnie Hammer says in her book that women are good at juggling multiple things. And so I thought that was interesting. As women, we do tend to juggle a lot of things at the same time. Does that mean we do it well? Maybe not always, but that we're good at juggling multiple things. She goes on to talk about sort of the mental juggling, the mental load. As I think about it, I think about the ability to kind of task transition. Right. And so if you are moving from one thing to the next, that as women, we tend to be able to maybe compartmentalize a little bit differently or a little bit better, that we're able to keep track of things differently than men are. And so we're able to manage multiple projects, multiple tasks, lots of humans. All kind of at the same time. Now, I know not everybody who's a listener is a parent, and so I know that this is kind of that gross generalization again, but as women, I think that we are socialized to be able to manage all the things. And as parents, we are socialized to be able to, transition from work, come home, help around the house, manage the kids, manage the schedule, manage the grocery list, right? Like all the different things that we manage, partially because we like to control, and that's okay. But also because that's kind of how we're socialized. And so I think that that multiple things juggling component is part of our DNA, right, wrong, or different. And it's one of those things that we continue to work through, right? Our intuition, friends, my intuition is strong, right? Like something doesn't feel right. I may not be able to put my finger on it, but something doesn't feel right, and I'm gonna say something. I'm gonna say something until I can verbalize it. I'm gonna say something until somebody hears me. Most recently, it was one of the executive orders, and I said I don't really have a dog in this fight, but man, I have a lot of anxiety around right a certain topic, and so I think that the intuition piece is really important. We're experts. Bonnie says we are experts at picking up on verbal and nonverbal cues. And as I read that, I started thinking about my own environment and how, like, when somebody, twitches wrong, I can see that. I do see that a lot of times. But that's also probably because I make a lot of faces, and, when my mouth quiets down, my face doesn't. But I think that we're trained to pick up on, or socially trained maybe, or we're better at differently better, I don't know, at picking up on those verbal and those nonverbal cues, learning when to be quiet because the voice has already been heard and we don't need to reiterate anything, right? Learning how to understand maybe when you're in a room and That's not a fight to pick. Or maybe your supervisor, your boss has already picked that fight and you are picking up on it didn't go well, so don't introduce that into the conversation, right? Battle, fight, conversation, right? All those sorts of things. So really that intuition, leaning into that intuition, and being able to utilize that as a tool and a skill set in your conversations and in your workplace. Another one she talked about was how time and society tell us to discard all of these traits, right? They tell us for as long as we know, as long as we remember, as long as we've been studying it, that we should just not um, we should not lean into all these things that she just highlighted and a ton more, right? Like we have tons of skill sets that are incredible. She tells us not to lean into that, or society tells us not to lean into that, time tells us not to into that, then we just need to push them to the side, we need to discard them. But really, these are the things that make us great leaders. These are the things that make us invaluable in the workplace. And so we need to learn how to be authentic, how to be true to ourselves differently so that we can lean into these skill sets, we can lean into these traits, we can be an asset and a leader in our workplace. We can role model and be an example for other women about how to be successful in a man's world, but really being true to ourselves, being true to what we believe in and to what are our strengths already. And, all of this is to say that we're not better than men. It's not about being better than men, but we do certain things better. And we should highlight those. We should lean into those. We should embrace those pieces so that we can have a stronger workplace presence, so that we can be more impactful in our workplace and in our world, really, right, as we think about all of these skill sets. So some tips that I wanted to share, and she has these in this chapter as well, and so I want to make sure that I honor and respect the work that she's done. But she talks about being like a woman, right? Care like a woman. Check in on others. Make sure that you're following up with folks. If they're having a rough time or a bad day, or maybe it was a rough meeting, check in on people. They don't have to be your direct reports. You don't have to have, direct relationships with them for the workplace. But if you see someone who's having a tough go at it, check in on them. Be a good support network. Care like a woman does. She says to communicate like a woman. Listen to people and talk to people, not at them, right? Make sure that you're having a good conversation. You're listening to what they're saying. You're listening to what they're not saying, right? Leaning back into that intuition. And reading those nonverbal cues, or the things that they're not saying, the things that they're maybe pausing on or hesitating on. Make sure that you're being a good communicator and you're communicating like a woman. Collaborate like a woman. Michelle, what does that mean? That means seeing the bigger picture. Friends, we as women are pretty darn good at being taskmasters. Where's my to-do listers? Yes. Love a good to-do list. But and paying attention to the details. Again, back to the grocery list, back to that invisible labor that Danielle talked about in an episode a couple years ago. Really good episode, friends. Go check that one out. But being that collaborator also means seeing the bigger picture. How does what is in front of us fit into the bigger picture, both in work and in life, but especially at work? How do we make sure that we're seeing the bigger picture, that we're getting to do or putting the work in that is going to contribute to whatever that bigger picture is, whether it's your bigger picture, departmental bigger picture, your supervisor's bigger picture, whatever that is? Being a collaborator, collaborate like a woman. Now, I love this one, fight like a woman, right? We talked about this a little bit earlier, but and maybe fight's not the right word, but looking to resolve rather than win, especially in conflicts and in conversations. When you're going into those, how do you look to resolve situations, which is what our natural tendency tends to be, rather than win. Don't get me wrong, winning sometimes has to happen, right? There are times when I'm a rule follower by nature, which is great and also blessing and a curse, right? And so, I think that it is important to know when you do have to go to battle to win, but you also need to understand that it is more important to resolve a situation than it is to win a situation. So, how do you get there and how do you fight like a woman? Now, cry like a woman intrigues me. And I used to think when I was trained starting in grad school and as a grad student, I used to think that women could not cry in the workplace. Right? You have to be seen like a man. You cannot show emotion in the workplace. And so I'd cry behind closed door. I'd get frustrated. Whatever. I'd cry on the phone to my parents or whatever that was. And then I got wise and I started following some humans that I have mad respect for in my field. And they would talk about being emotional and crying at work when things were tough, when they were having a tough time. Now, I'm not saying crying at work is a good thing, right? You don't want to be the crier at your workplace. But I also believe it is okay to show that kind of emotion at work. And some of us cry because we're sad. And some of us cry because we are so incredibly frustrated that that is the emotion that comes out. It's not yelling, it's not screaming. Hey, for the sailor who swears, me, it's not even cussing. Sometimes we are so upset, so frustrated, so angry that crying is the emotion that shows up, whether we want it to or not. And as women, doggone it, if that's what it is, then let it be, friends. Don't be the crier every time. But sometimes you gotta drop an appropriate F-bomb, friends. Sometimes you gotta cry at appropriate times, or it's okay to cry at appropriate times because the situation warrants it. The situation is so overwhelming. But what Bonnie says in her book is that crying, well, she says you should not cry at work. She says you should be emotionally intelligent enough to cry outside of work because of work. I think I might disagree with her on that one. But what I do agree with her on is it is a physical release, right? There are all kinds of like oxytocin and endorphins that get released when you cry. And so that release is helpful because it helps you move on. And maybe you know some of those situations where you've had a good cry and now you can move past it. You know how to move on. One of my most stressful days of the year, housing professional here, friends, for my new friends here, and moving is incredibly stressful. And I had a moment where this dude that I work with, great dude, and also he just straight pissed me off one day. Right? And I was stressed out because it's a stressful time of the year. And guess what? I got busted crying. And that's okay. And I had someone check up on me and said, you had your 5 minutes. I'll give you your 5 minutes and then I'm coming back and we're going to move on. And it's good to have humans who do that. It's good to set those boundaries for yourself. It's okay to cry at work, but don't be the crier at work. There's a difference. And then the last tip, my friends, is to earn like a woman. Now, what does that mean? Because we already know men earn more than women. Women still are only earning 85% of what men earn, which is sad and frustrating and continues to be something we have to work at. However, women women entrepreneurs are more successful. Statistics show us this, and she gives us some data in this chapter. And also, we need to keep asking for our money. Ask for our money. Do it in the appropriate settings. Do it when you know that it is deserved, not because there are other situations happening. But ask for your money, friends. Women, we don't ask for our money in the ways that we should. So earn like a woman. My friends, thanks for tuning in again this week. I hope you liked this topic. This was one of the chapters that really stood out to me. One of the reasons why I purchased the book after listening to the audiobook again. It is called 15 Lies Women Are Told at Work, and it's by Bonnie Hammer. Really good book if you're looking for a nonfiction book to pull nuggets out. There's really good stuff. And so I appreciate you tuning in again this week. I appreciate you continuing to come back and be part of this community where we're advocating and empowering one another to do good work out in the world. So this week's affirmations: I'm done apologizing for showing up for me. I'm done apologizing for working in a man's world, but only the way we want to work in a man's world. This one's for you. I'm done apologizing for, you fill in the blank here. Friends, go out there, have an incredible week, do the amazing things I know you're capable of. And remember to like, follow, and share wherever you're listening. Make sure you subscribe. Friends, we're on YouTube now, whether it's on YouTube or any of your podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe button so you know when the latest and newest podcast episode drops, which is every Monday morning. Social media, I'm blowing up social media, friends. So just like the past, I'm on Instagram, I'm over on Facebook groups, and I'm on Blue Sky a little bit, but I've also ventured into LinkedIn and TikTok. So make sure that you're following me on some version of @done.apologizing, @done_apologizing, or @done-apologizing, and tune in for other ways to follow on my social media platforms. Friends, I have incredible guests, and if you want to be part of that incredible team of guests, make sure that you fill out the form at the link in my show notes or over on any of my social media platforms. I would love to hear the things you're passionate about and share with my listeners. And remember, you're fabulous. You're a badass. You've got this, and I'm here for you.